In 1987, an arcade game released by Capcom would lay the foundation for what would become a fighting game. That game was Street Fighter. The game used 6 attack buttons for attacks, and used command-based special moves. While the game was successful, it didn't set the world on fire, and playing it today would show there was a great reason why. You could only choose from 2 characters with the same fighting style, and trying to input the special moves was a nightmare thanks to the small gaps between individual inputs. However, Capcom saw potential in their new IP and decided to make a sequel for it. Capcom's new sequel didn't start as a fighting game, believe it or not. The game was originally going to be in the style of a beat-em-up. It was tentatively titled Street Fighter 89, slated to be released that year. The game's director, Akira Nishitani, stated in an interview that Capcom had ordered him to make a, quote, typical belt-scroll game because, quote, the price of ROM had just gone up. This beat-em-up was the brainchild of Yoshiki Okamoto, a former director at Capcom. However, the Street Fighter branding wasn't doing any justice to the original Street Fighter. In an interview with Video Game Spot, he said, "The sales division at Capcom said we had to make another Street Fighter. We tried to say that Final Fight was Street Fighter 2 at a trade show, but all the operators said, 'Hey, that's not Street Fighter.' This led to the decision to change the name of the game to Final Fight." Work on a true sequel to Street Fighter had already begun. The year is 1991, 4 years after the release of the original Street Fighter. A true sequel to the game arrived in arcades. It was called Street Fighter II: The World Warrior. Street Fighter II introduced many new aspects for the genre it was building. The players could now choose from 8 characters. Ryu, from Japan, the Shotokan practicing protagonist of the first game. Ken, from the USA, Ryu's sparring partner and fellow Shoto trained under their master, whose name may not be Shenlong. Ken also appeared in the first game. Guile, from the USA, a lieutenant in the United States Air Force. Chun-Li, from China, the strongest woman in the world. Edmund Honda, or E Honda, from Japan, a powerful sumo wrestler. Dhalsim, from India, a mystic practitioner of yoga. Zangief, from Russia, a professional wrestler. And Blanca, from Brazil, a mutant man-beast thing. The game also introduced players to the 4 Grandmasters of Shadaloo. Balrog, from the USA, a boxer with a reputation for dirty fighting. Vega, from Spain, a bullfighter ninja with a mask and a claw. Sagat, from Thailand, Ryu's nemesis and the final boss of the original game. And M. Bison from Who Knows Where, a diabolical dictator and leader of the Shadaloo crime syndicate. Upon its release, Street Fighter II was a massive hit. It took in over $687 million in quarters by 1995, or $1.26 billion adjusted for inflation. It saw multiple home console ports, including the Super Nintendo version. The SNES version alone sold 6.3 million units worldwide. The feature that made Street Fighter II stand out was how a player could string several attacks together in quick succession. This was a combination attack, or combo. Combos, believe it or not, were actually created on accident. Lead producer Noritaka Funamizu found that these extra attacks were noticeable during a bug check in the Crush the Car minigame. He stated that such a mechanic would be too difficult to be practical and left it in the game as a hidden mechanic for players to discover. The combo system would go on to become a standard for every fighting game that followed Street Fighter II. The next year would see a refresh of the base game called Street Fighter II Champion Edition. Champion Edition saw balance changes to the original game, as well as adding the ability to play as the 4 boss characters Balrog, Vega, Sagat, and M. Bison. There were also more tweaks made to further enhance the experience. Players could now pick the same character to fight with, and there were new color palettes for the characters to distinguish one player from another. Champion Edition grossed over $2.3 billion in arcades, and saw home ports to the TurboGrafx and the Sega Genesis. Unfortunately, there was no Super Nintendo version. It wouldn't be a full retrospective of Street Fighter II without mentioning an interesting side note. Street Fighter II Rainbow Edition. Rainbow Edition was the general term for hacked versions of Champion Edition. The main difference being that it threw the entire concept of balance out the window. Characters could throw air fireballs, move ridiculously fast, and even change into other characters on the fly. Also, fireballs were homing projectiles. Rainbow Edition attracted the attention of Capcom for a few different reasons. One of them was to bury the makers of this hack with a lawsuit, and the other was because this version had a few interesting ideas to incorporate in their next iteration of Street Fighter II. A faster speed and aerial specials would be at the top of their agenda for the project. And by the way, the makers of the hack, Hung C Enterprises, disbanded amidst the threat of being sued into oblivion. Fans of Street Fighter II were clamoring for another game. Using ideas they may have found from Rainbow Edition, Capcom launched Street Fighter II Turbo Hyper Fighting in the same year that Champion Edition came out. While there were no new characters added to the roster, they weren't needed. The main draws of the game were new special moves for some characters, such as Chun-Li's Fireball Kikoken, Dhalsim's Yoga Teleport, and Air Tatsumaki Senpuyaku, or Hurricane Kicks, for Ryu and Ken. And an increase to the game's overall speed, which made inputs require more precise timing. Turbo saw releases on home platforms, most notably the SNES and Genesis, with the SNES version selling 4.1 million units. Turbo would be the last version of Street Fighter II on Capcom's System 1 arcade board, as the series was about to get a major upgrade the next year. In 1993, Street Fighter II got a major overhaul. It would be the first game to be blessed with Capcom's System 2 hardware, which featured more vibrant graphics and high-quality sound thanks to its onboard Q-Sound chip. This was the start of the new generation. This was
Super Street Fighter II.
In addition to the visual and audio upgrades, the series saw the addition of 4 characters officially known as the New Challengers. They were DJ from Jamaica, a kickboxer and musician, possibly inspired by Billy Blanks. Fei Long from Hong Kong, insert Bruce Lee's Wikipedia page here. Thunderhawk, or T-Hawk, from Mexico, a Native American fighting to take back his land from Shadaloo. And Cammy from England, the super sexy super spy. Street Fighter II finally made the combo system a full-fledged feature by adding a combo counter to tell how many hits a player has landed in quick succession. Many hardcore fans were disappointed that the game had gone back to the original speed settings before Turbo. In the end, it really did feel like a remastered version of the original Street Fighter II. That all changed in 1994. With the knowledge that some fans were upset with Super's slower speed, Capcom decided to slap a turbocharger on that game. Armed with a speed boost and a hidden new villain, this was
Super Street Fighter II Turbo.
Although few mechanics changed, there were a few new features worth noting. Faster gameplay speed, as mentioned before, All characters now had a super meter. If it was full, a player could perform a super combo that could deal heavy damage. And throw teching. If a player gets thrown, they can attempt to input throw in a small time frame to take half damage and land on their feet. The roster is the same as Super, but it added one new hidden fighter. Akuma, also known as Goki, from Japan. He is another Shotokan practitioner, but is consumed by dark energies. Akuma served as the secret final boss in the game's single-player mode if the player met certain conditions. Compared to Ryu or Ken, he can warp around his opponents and throw fireballs in midair. Akuma was also available for the player to select if they knew the right combination of button presses and stick movements. Out of all the Street Fighter II variations, Super Turbo's mix of speed and control made it popular amongst the growing fighting game community. It gave rise to some of the greatest names in the FGC, including Alex Valle and Daigo Umehara. It ran at several tournaments throughout the end of the decade as well as the mid-2000s. It continues to see success at other major tournaments today, such as Combo Breaker. It also had a long run at EVO, arguably the largest fighting game tournament in the world, with its run ending in 2010. Well, sort of. Even though Super Turbo was the last game in the Street Fighter II series, it really wasn't. There were multiple releases of new games spreading across 2 decades. In addition to all the compilation discs like Street Fighter Collection, there was Super Street Fighter II X for matching service. It was a version of Super Turbo for the Dreamcast, only available through mail order in Japan, and it featured online play. Sadly, matching service was shut down in 2003 as the Dreamcast was essentially dead at that point. There was also Super Street Fighter II Turbo Revival for Game Boy Advance in 2001. It was the same as Super Turbo, but it featured a 4-button scheme tailor-made for the Game Boy. It featured new character portraits and new stage designs, some of which were actually borrowed from Street Fighter Alpha 2. Then in 2003, Capcom released Hyper Street Fighter II: The Anniversary Edition. This version was built off the framework of Super Turbo, but it allowed the player to choose from different versions of the characters. For example, it's possible to pit Super Turbo Ryu against Champion Edition Ken in this game. The home versions were released as standalone games in Europe and Japan, but were bundled with Street Fighter III Third Strike and a title called Street Fighter Anniversary Collection. In addition, the home console versions featured the full movie Street Fighter II. Not the live-action one, but the anime movie. There was also a release of this game in arcades, being the last Capcom game to use the CPS2 board. A bittersweet celebration for the series, as interest in both fighting games and arcades were almost dead. Then, in 2008, hot on the heels of Street Fighter IV, came Super Street Fighter II Turbo HD Remix. It was the same as Super Turbo, but with new high-definition graphics. The graphics were drawn by Udon Studios, best known for making the ongoing Street Fighter comic book series. Music was reimagined by Overclocked Remix, a non-commercial organization specializing in video game music preservation and remixes. Remember what I said about Super Turbo being dropped from EVO after 2010? Well, I kinda lied. HD Remix was at EVO before being dropped in 2010. As if Capcom wasn't done milking the game for all it's worth, they released one last game in the Street Fighter II series in 2017.
Ultra Street Fighter II: The Final Challengers!
The game released as an exclusive title for Nintendo's newest console, the Switch. Unlike HD Remix, Ultra included several new features, some of which were actually copied from other fighting games. There were 3 new challengers, the Final Challengers. Evil Ryu, who is essentially a mix between Ryu and Akuma, Violent Ken, an evil version of Ken who originated in the SNK-developed game SVC Chaos SNK vs. Capcom, and Shin Akuma, a stronger variation of Akuma who can be accessed through specific button inputs, however he can't be played online. In addition, Akuma can now be chosen regularly from the character select screen. There were two different graphics modes, Classic and New Generation. The latter reuses artwork from HD Remix, but takes most sounds and voice samples from Street Fighter IV. Color Edit, first seen in Capcom vs. SNK and SVC Chaos, and Way of the Hado, the only new mode designed to utilize the Switch's motion controls. Ultra received a lukewarm reception from critics, with the general consensus being that the game was overpriced while not providing worthwhile new content. Despite this, Ultra has sold over 450,000 units as of 2019. It even inspired Capcom to develop more games for the Switch. Lastly, and more recently, Capcom released Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection in 2018 to celebrate the series' 30th anniversary. The collection covered all the games in the Street Fighter series before 2000, including the first game, the Alpha series, Street Fighter 3, and all of Street Fighter 2, not including Rainbow Edition, of course. There was also a ton of bonus features that chronicled the history of the whole series, including art galleries, an interactive timeline, and even developer biographies. More notably, the Switch version allowed for 8-player tournaments in Super Turbo between 4 consoles. A great collection for a fighting veteran. No video game has had such a lasting impact as Street Fighter II. It was played by millions of people during its height, and also saw multiple revisions over the years, consistently improving upon all aspects of the game. The game had many features that would go on to inspire all other successful fighters from the likes of Midway, SNK, and many more. All versions of Street Fighter II have grossed over $10 billion in revenue in this day and age, making it one of the highest grossing games of all time. And with tournaments like Combo Breaker happening, the game will always get its chance in the spotlight at least one more time. Street Fighter II was, and still is, the granddaddy of all fighting games. Because the fight is everything. Whew, man, that was exhausting. Anyways, it's me, Squiddy. thank you once again for watching, and I really, really hope you enjoyed it. So you're probably wondering, what's this all about? Why am I here at the end of the video? Well, I'm glad you asked. As you might be aware, the Tournament Combo Breaker is happening on the weekend that I've been putting this together. And, like, it's almost finished because it's Saturday, the day I'm recording this message. So, I would like to officially announce that I will be in attendance at Combo Breaker 2020. Why not this year? Well, like I said, it's too late now. So, what am I going to do there? Probably record some footage of, like, me exploring the venue, or probably entering the Super Turbo tournament. So you might be able to see some matches from me. Maybe not, because they might not stream it. In the meantime, in order to prepare for that, I'll be practicing over Fightcade, most likely. I think. So I really, really hope to see you there when I inevitably drown in pools. It's gonna be awesome.
We await your return, warrior.